Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I think I'd like to follow up on that line of questioning. I think what I hear you saying today and what I think I've heard you say is that as a matter of policy, you do not believe that the TARP funds should be allocated to the big three automakers. But to be specific, do you believe under the definition of financial institution in the underlying legislation that you are authorized to expend these sums if you so chose?
Congressman, I think I'll just leave it where I left it. I don't think this is the purpose of the legislation.
Well, I understand that, Mr. Secretary. Then let me follow up by asking, what is your understanding of what qualifies for a financial institution under the legislation? For example, I read press reports recently that a group of plumbing contractors were applying for portions of the TARP funds in order to refurbish some foreclosed properties, making their case that that qualifies them as a financial institution. So in your mind, since you are essentially in charge of dispersing the funds, can you give me a clearer black and white definition of what a financial institution is?
Congressman, I can't. We have a broad definition. We got very broad authorities and powers, and I think that's appropriate. But we certainly are not going to give money to plumbing contractors, and we're not going to give money to a lot of other people and institutions that are applying. We've had a very clear focus here right now, and again, I feel a great responsibility, even though the powers may be very broad and appropriately so. I feel a great responsibility to stick with what the purpose is. And the purpose is of stabilizing and strengthening our financial system. And I've said to you very clearly that I believe that the auto companies fall outside of that purpose.
Chairman Bernake, the Federal Reserve has been very aggressive in developing new credit facilities, expanded facilities, reducing collateral standards for troubled financial services companies. But by some estimates, we now have an exposure somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 trillion of commitments by the Federal Reserve. Can you tell us exactly how much exposure is out there, how much money has been lent?
Well, our balance sheet's about $2 trillion, of which I'm guessing now $600 billion is treasuries and agencies. The rest is some kind of credit extension of some type. The overwhelming amount, however, is of two classes. It's either lending, collateralized lending to financial institutions I described earlier. Those are loans made with recourse and on haircut collateral. They're short-term loans, and they're quite safe. We never lost a penny on one of those. The other type of lending we've been doing is we've been doing currency swaps with some major central banks in order to try to address dollar funding problems in other jurisdictions. There, the credit risk is of the foreign central bank, like the European Central Bank, and we consider that to be a zero risk, essentially. So the overwhelming majority of our lending is at very low credit risk.
Well, you appear to be going where perhaps no Federal Reserve Chairman has gone before, and this may be a very good thing given the crisis at hand, but just how much more are you prepared to commit and expose present and future taxpayers' liability to?
Well, I think we need to do what we need to do to keep the U.S. credit system working and to try to create a recovery in the financial system. By law, our lending has to be against fully collateralized, secure backing. We're actually making money in some of our programs. I don't see us as having a substantial exposure. It's a liquidity provision process, not a credit or a fiscal process.
At what point do you believe that these activities could undermine your ability to actually, on a prospective basis, impact monetary policies, and at what point might it adversely affect the credit rating of the U.S.? Well,
the size of the balance sheet has affected, to some extent, the amount of reserves in the banking system, which makes it more difficult to control the federal funds rate. It was a productive and useful feature of this same bill we're discussing, that it included the right for the Federal Reserve to pay interest on reserves to banks, which has been helpful in keeping the federal funds rate closer to the target than it otherwise would be. But that is still an issue that we're working on. Again, I see no significant credit risk in what we're doing, and I don't think it would have any benefit or any effect one way or the other on U.S. credit rating. That's my assessment. I haven't heard anyone give me a view to the contrary.
I thank the gentleman. I do have to note, Mr. Secretary, there was a general response, which I heard from several of the members after your last comment, that the 15 minutes of fame for the plumbing industry appears to have ended. The gentleman from California.
Joe's had a rough month, I'll tell you that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. It's very much needed. And I welcome our representatives from our 3 agencies that are here today. I come here very troubled about the direction that Secretary Paulson has taken as it relates to the $700 billion that we made available to him to help stabilize our economy. It is very clear, no matter how the Secretary describes it, that we gave him the authority that you identified when you talked with him, Mr. Chairman, to deal with foreclosure mitigation efforts. As a matter of fact, the purchase of toxic assets was at the centerpiece of this program, because everybody agreed at that time that the subprime meltdown was at the epicenter of the dislocation that we were experiencing in our economy. So the fact that you, Mr. Paulson, took it upon yourself to absolutely ignore the authority and the direction that this Congress had given you just amazes me. I just could not believe it when I heard that somehow you had abandoned the whole foreclosure mitigation effort. Now, in addition to that, I want you to know that I and some others worked very, very hard to pass this. As a matter of fact, I was looked at with great suspicion by members of my caucus and the Congressional Black Caucus in particular, as I sold them this program and told them about my faith in your ability to carry out this program. I was asked over and over again, will the homeowners be helped? What are we going to do about Main Street, not just Wall Street? And we spent, and I spent, considerable time selling this program to those who were suspicious and did not want to do it. Now, having said that, again, I'm disappointed that you have not utilized the authority and you have just divorced yourself from dealing with that. On the other hand, in your testimony today, you say, and we need to continue our efforts to use a variety of authorities to reduce avoidable foreclosures. The government has made substantial progress on that front through HUD programs, through the FDIC's program within DMAC, through our support and leadership of the Hope Now Alliance, and through the new GSC service guidelines announced last week that will set a new standard for the industry. Let me just relate to this statement. First of all, the HUD programs working under Hope Now have not been successful. It's a terrible failure. I convened in my office all of the HUD-backed counseling programs when we went on break, and I sat down and I talked with them to find out what kind of success were they having working with the Hope Now program. And to a person, they have not been able to get in touch with the servicers. In many cases, when they get in touch with them, many of the services are inexperienced. They don't have the ability to make good decisions. Nobody knows what formulas they're using in order to make decisions about a homeowner's ability to get a loan modification. And so they all work under Hope Now. So Hope Now has been a failure. And even though you identify it as a success, I'm not going to challenge you, but I would dare say that you could not cite